I want to talk about something that's been in the media quite a bit of late, which is population. So this is a subject that's been quite a big thing over the last century or so. For most of the last century, people have been worried about the population exploding, getting higher and higher and higher. So I remember when I was a kid, the population had hit sort of, I think, 3.5 million, and I remember when it passed 4 million, and people were quite shocked. Billion. I meant to say billion. People were actually worried about whether there was enough room, whether there'd be enough food, etc. And there was quite a famous book from, I think, the late 60s called the Population Bomb, which has proved to be quite wrong. Most likely because of improvements in technology, which has enabled us to have better facilities for agriculture. So provision of food around the world has vastly improved since the 1960s. Of course, there's still a huge number of people who live in poverty around the world. I think it's something like a third or so of people in the world you could describe as living in poverty. And I think there's over 1 billion people who are living sort of at the point of starvation, or more or less, which is pretty appalling, given that there's now 8 billion people in the world, and that's continuing to rise very, very slowly at the moment, and is probably likely to go into a decline. So there are still people who are worried about the population getting too big, but there's also now an increasing trend of people worrying about the population dropping very significantly and in a relatively short period of time. And this isn't really down to resources, this is down to demographic and social changes. And you could say the canary in the coal mine is Hong Kong and also South Korea. You have what is the population replacement rate, and this will be generally regarded as 2.1 or 2.2 children per couple. So the reason it's slightly bigger than 2, because obviously 2 people get together and they have 2 babies, that should replace the 2 of them and keep a constant level. But the fact is, it needs to be a tiny bit higher because sometimes people die. Children don't make it into adulthood, etc. So it's slightly more than 2, the replacement rate. Now, I've had a look at the statistics up to, I think it's last year or the year before, and coming in at 0.8 is Hong Kong, and you've got South Korea slightly above that at 0.9 roughly. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got countries like Niger in Africa, many African states, a lot of the Middle Eastern and Arab states coming in with very high levels, starting around 6 and then going down from there. So I think there was about 204 countries and territories in this list. I think the first 90 were higher than 2, and then the rest of the list was lower than that. So now you've got a situation where quite a large number of countries, roughly around half, or just slightly more than half now, have been producing new births, new children below the replacement rate. And if you look at the trends from a few years ago, you can see that the birth rates are dropping all across the world. So that would mean, like, for instance, I think Niger was 6.6 and it's down to about 6 now in the most recent surveys. So what's happening is the poorer countries have got a slowly dropping rate, still high, but dropping significantly. And now we have a situation where India has now overtaken China as the most populous nation, and that still has a very high birth rate and population replacement rate. It's not the highest by any means, and it is dropping. It is dropping in India, but it's still high enough that it has passed out China, which has a catastrophically low rate of, I think it's about 1 or 1.1. I'd have to double check exactly, but it is very, very low. So, although China has this massive population of approximately 1.4 billion people, it's not being added to at any vast rate, and in fact, it's beginning to go into a decline now because there are so many old people and there's less young people being born to replace them. And as these people get older and older, they're beginning to die off. So people are often confused about this subject. And it's quite simple, really. If you do a bit of simple maths, you can see that if people have a very low rate of birth, then the population can decline very quickly. So eventually, each generation will die off. People get old, and generally around the sort of 70 plus, the death rate of people goes much, much higher. So by the time people get to 100 plus, they have very few of their family and peers and friends of a similar age still around, which is rather sad for elderly people. I remember just recently I seen an article about one of the last surviving fighter pilots from World War II who flew for the RAF, an Irishman who is just recently celebrated his 105th birthday. He's the only person left out of all of those people described, I think by Winston Churchill, as the few, the few that fought to save Britain and the Allies from Nazi occupation in the Royal Air Force and other Allied air forces. But anyway, getting back to the main theme of this, once you get to an advanced age, there's less and less people of a similar age, and eventually that entire generation will die off. So what's happening in these countries with a very low rate is each successive generation is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it only takes a small amount of generations, about 3 or 4, before you get into an absolutely staggering drop in population. So I've got 2 examples which I'm going to show you. Okay, here's the first one. What I've done is I decided to call this the, I'm not doing very well with the alignment, the Republic of Humania, which is a made-up place, of course. So if I hold it up, you can see, there it is. Say we've got a population of 1,000, an example, and we're going to assume that everybody gets married, and there's 500 men and 500 women, with a replacement rate of 2 exactly, which means that these 500 men and women of each, will then produce 1,000 babies. So you say you go 1,000, there's a little pram to demonstrate it. Right, so you go to the next generation, you've got the same thing again, because you've produced 1,000 people, and none of them die off, we're going to assume, just to simplify matters. Nobody dies prematurely. They also have 1,000 babies. Then those babies grow up, you've got 500 men and 500 women, and they continue to produce 1,000 babies each time, which means that the population stays the same. So, you know, if it's above 2.1, then it's going to go up. And if it's below 2, it's going to go down. So 2 to 2.2 is a stable population. In this fictitious example, obviously there's no place like that. Republic of Humania doesn't exist. I've just made it up. And, you know, in reality, not everyone gets married. And not everybody has children. And not all of the children that are produced by a couple are going to survive, unfortunately. Well, so that's like an ideal case scenario of this made-up republic. So I'm going to show you another example, which is scenario B, again with the made-up republic of Humania. So here we go. You can see this time we've got the same number of people, 1,000, population of 1,000, 500 men, 500 women. And we're going to assume, for the sake of argument, that, you know, everybody decides to get married and have children, regardless of their preferences. We're just going to pretend that that's what happens. So you've got a replacement rate of 1 this time instead of 2. So what that means is that those 500 couples will produce 500 babies in total. So like the 1,000 people produce 500 babies between them. So you go into the next generation and you've got a smaller group already. You've only got 500 people. So 250 men, 250 women, they all decide to procreate and have babies. With that replacement rate of 1, you've got now 250 babies. I'm having difficulty getting this positioned right. So anyway, we move on to the next example. You've got now generation 3. Those 250 babies grow up and they're going to produce more children at a rate of 1. So the 125 men, 125 women, between them, they produce another 125 new babies for the next generation. As you can see, there's a massive drop here from what was 1,000 at the beginning. You've now got just 125 babies. And assuming everybody dies off in the previous generations, you've got a population that declines to 12.5% of what it originally was in the space of just 3 generations. Okay, and that's at a replacement rate of 1. So, by any calculations, really, that's an enormous drop, an absolutely catastrophic drop. And as I mentioned, Hong Kong, their replacement rate at the moment is 0.8, so it's even more stark, even more catastrophic than in my fictitious example of the Republic of Humania. You know, because in Hong Kong, not everyone will want to get married, not everyone will want to have children. There'll be people who are like gay or lesbian. There'll be people who, for whatever reason, just decide they want to stay single. And not every child that's born will survive into adulthood in order to then go on and have children themselves. So that's given people's choices, plus a few other factors like early death, etc. You've got a very, very low rate in Hong Kong of 0.8, which in quite a short time is going to be catastrophic for the population unless there's a sudden massive upsurge in births and women that want to have babies. It's going to continue to plummet. The only other way that population can increase again is if immigration is massively increased to make up for the deficit in births. So you can see, rather than having a massive explosion of people, what is quite likely, if birth rates continue dropping all across the world, within a few generations, we could have like a absolutely catastrophic drop in the world population, and certainly in some countries that drop is already in progress and has started off. I mean, 8 billion people is a lot of people. It's not that we have a shortage of people in the world, but as you can see from my example, the massive drop in population can happen within somebody's lifetime. Someone who's born and grows up to be, say, 80 or 100 years old, they could well see such an event happen where the population of their country may have dropped to as little as 10% of what it might have been when they were born. And to witness such a thing would be utterly shocking, I'm sure. So I think governments are beginning to worry about this problem already, and you can see it in their concerns about how they're going to pay for old people in their sort of retirement, and the cost of healthcare, etc., when such a huge proportion of your population are elderly people. Now, there aren't really any easy solutions to this problem, and it's something that governments and people all over the world are going to have to think about, because it's not going to just disappear. It's going to be a very, very real, palpable problem that will have to be dealt with one way or another. And sticking our heads in the sand isn't going to change that. In fact, sticking our heads in the sand is actually only going to make it worse, because the longer solutions to these problems are not worked on and developed, the worse the problem is going to be, unfortunately. So anyway, I hope that makes the situation with birth rates and replacement rates a bit more clear, and you have a better idea of where the world is actually moving towards. So thank you for watching, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe or hit the like button, and thank you for watching. That's it for now.